I'm Glen Alex, your host of The Glen Alex Show. Each episode of The Glen Alex Show focuses on a different aspect of health because I believe in the whole person and all of you matter. And I'm on a mission to help you be joyful, connected, confident, and complete. The life experience we call wealth, WELLTH, which is health plus other riches. And I am so excited about this episode because I am going to learn something new. And I came across this topic in my research about some health things, and I had to have Sally Norton on the show. So please help me welcome Sally Norton to the Glen Alex Show. Hi, Sally.
Hello. It's
Hello.
so nice to connect with you and your audience. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for making time. I'm just really blown away by this topic. Thank you for introducing me and my audience to it. Before we jump into anything, just please take a minute and tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Sally Norton, Sally K. Norton, and I've been in the health sphere my entire life. I decided as a seventh grader, I wanted a nutrition degree to help people not be sick. Because the science teacher was like, hey, if you eat a certain way, you're going to get cancer and heart disease. And if you eat this other way, you won't. And I'm thinking, my God, you have a total choice over your health. Who wouldn't want that?
Right.
And I was already a nutrition geek by kindergarten, actually. I was coming home with all the news that had to do with how to live healthy. So
Okay.
been at this a long time. I went to Cornell for my nutrition degree and worked in public health. I worked in the inner city in Cleveland, and I went on and got my master's degree in public health and focused on successful aging and then integrative medicine, and worked in the integrative medicine field. And then when the grants ran out, I moved on and wrote a series of research grants for a burgeoning school of public health here in Virginia. That didn't really happen, but I've been done lots of aspects in public health. And I wrecked my health being healthy. I didn't know why I was having health trouble, but eventually I had to quit work and was disabled. And it took me another 3 years to finally discover what had happened to me. And and it was sort of revealing itself slowly, but eventually I landed into this place where I'm now the oxalate educator, where I've done all this research and pulled together a book, and have a specialty practice now helping people like me who have ruined our health on healthy eating.
Oh, okay. Wow. So how long ago was that when you were disabled?
I quit my career in 2010,
Okay.
needed a hysterectomy, and that was ugly a situation. And I didn't recover from that. So I had been struggling, though, really with various issues related with fatigue and pain and cognitive function, really since I was a pubescent, budding teenager.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when I quit my job, I was about 48, maybe. No,
okay.
40, in my 40s somewhere. I don't know
Okay.
how old I was 12 years ago.
Okay, that's close enough.
Yeah, but it's like that's sort of the age where if you've been doing this to yourself, by the time you hit your mid 40s, you're kind of done often.
Okay. So once you figured out what it was, how long did it take you to recover?
Yeah, so interestingly, there's an initial like, oh, this gets better. The thing that really made it impossible for me to function was that my brain was no longer sleeping. So, after the hysterectomy, I lost all my parts and I needed an endocrinologist to like figure out life with no ovaries.
Okay.
And he couldn't figure out what to do with me because the blood work still looked fine, as it usually always does. And I physically look fine, but I can't function. And so he sent me to the sleep lab, and the sleep lab study showed that my brain was waking up 29 times an hour.
Okay.
So that's like 2 minutes of sleep at the most at any given moment. So, you can't function on that. And so that recovered very quickly. Within 10 days, I was reading again, and, my brain was waking up, and I was feeling more like a human being again, because you lose your ability to focus when you can't sleep.
Oh, sleep is huge.
Oh my gosh. I think sleep makes people like murderers and suicide. Like, it's not pretty to not sleep. It's so critical for your brain to do its healing and recovery. And of course, the whole body is doing healing and recovery while you're sleeping.
While you're sleeping, sleep affects everything. Yes.
Yeah. As I like to say, the janitors come out at night and they clean you up. And if you don't get a good night's sleep, you become a mess.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So in your healing process, how did you figure out what was the root cause?
Well, I thank God for the internet, right? Because I used to work down the street from this thing called the Vulvar Pain Foundation, which is a nonprofit that's been out there doing this work, similar work, teaching people that oxalate in the diet, this chemical naturally occurring in our foods, can cause serious pelvic pain. And this woman was one of many women who had this vulvodynia, which is an incredible pain on the genitals. And she founded the Vulvar Pain Foundation to teach people that if they avoided the high oxalate foods, they could reduce or completely recover from pelvic pain of all kinds.
Wow. Okay.
And they discovered connective tissue issues. So here, I mean, I didn't even know about them. And I used to work down at UNC Chapel Hill and put together a big integrative medicine, conference, and would have loved to have her there. I didn't know about her until I had an attack of vulvar pain, and my husband looked it up on the internet and found her. So that was in 2009 while I was still working, and I tried to do it best I could, but my work was all consuming and I didn't have any leftover brain cells to really fully get this, and their materials didn't really understand the whole picture. So I stopped eating so much sweet potatoes and chard, but I didn't really understand it very well. But I knew now they educated me about what foods were high in oxalate. So even though I have a degree in nutrition, we don't get taught that. So I didn't really know. So she taught me that. So having that is the magic. If you learn when you're eating oxalate and you know when you're eating a lot of oxalate, at least you can think about, is this a factor in my health? So I had this tool. And so as I gradually went back to, well, how do I fix the sleep problem? How do I fix? So I studied that specifically and put myself on the 2 kiwi a day diet, which is supposed to fix the constipation and so on and all that. But so this autotoxicity that comes from SIBO and this kind of dysbiosis in the colon and the lower small intestine, that's supposed to be a major cause of sleep disorders.
Okay.
And that's because not being able to sleep is a toxicity condition. You're toxic if you're having sleep problems or twitching nerves, which is like this periodic limb movement, or the restless legs, is a twitchy, toxic nervous system.
Okay.
So I went on to 2 kiwis, knowing now, thanks to the Vulvar Pain Foundation, that 2 kiwis a day is messing around with oxalates. But that's why the oxalate in the kiwi is got a lot of these crystals that the plants make out of calcium oxalate, which are defensive barbs. They're like toothpicks. They make these bundles of toothpicks that are literally meant to be little arrows for attacking the eater that's going to attack the little seeds. They're there to protect the seeds in the kiwi fruit. And that's why people are now saying you can use it for constipation, because it will irritate your gut to the point where you'll get a spastic colon and get rid of your constipation. So anyway,
okay. Yes, let's get back to
long story is that kiwi experiment brought back my old arthritis with a vengeance. And I was doing the same yoga class 3 times a week, as much as I could. It's the same Bikram series every time. It's the same heat, same humidity, same series. And I was getting worse and worse and worse over this summer that I was doing the kiwi experiment with my range of motion, ability to hold poses, everything. And I was becoming more and more arthritic. That would really bother me in the evening when I was trying to sleep. And I suddenly dawned on me that all this arthritis that used to dog me badly in my 20s, when I was a vegan and vegetarian, I had terrible problems with arthritis, and it was coming back, and it just like the old days. And I realized that the oxalate was related to my arthritis. I didn't know it was related to sleep or all these other things, but I was like, oh man, I'm trying to fix the sleep thing, and now I have to do this stupid oxalate thing for the arthritis. Well, it turned out all my many long list of health problems are connected to the fact that I've been poisoning myself with high oxalate intake.
Okay. Well, I have digestive issues. I've been in the health space for decades, and I have never heard of this. I've done some pretty good research on my own just to get an understanding of what's happening in my own body with food, and I have never heard of oxalate overload. Why is this such a well kept secret, or why don't we know about this?
That was one of the major burning questions for me. Here I have a whole lifetime of being committed to knowing how to not have digestive problems. And I didn't know this. And so that's what drove me to the library, especially with the people I'm starting to discover. Like you start bumping it. Once you have this lens and you can see oxalate toxicity, and someone complains to you, like one of the women at the yoga studio, a fellow student said to me, she can't stay in the room for 90 minutes. She has to run to the bathroom. And I said to her, are you eating almonds or sweet potatoes or spinach? She goes, yeah, every day I eat almonds. I said, come to my house. And when she did, she brought all her records. Her story is really interesting, and some of it's in my book. Within 3 days, she was better. Now, her problem was a spastic colon. It's called fecal incontinence. So she would have 8 or 10 attacks a day of fecal incontinence with no control. So she had no feeling. She wouldn't even know when it was happening. She could smell it, but she couldn't feel it. So she had really bad spastic nerves that were hyperstimulated by the toxicity of the oxalate that was causing these spastic reactions in her colon, because she was eating almonds twice a day and eating peanut M&Ms and having peanut butter on toast and ordering sweet potato fries at restaurants. Because she was told gluten-free, dairy-free.
Yes.
And so she got away from dairy, which is protective. The calcium in dairy is protective. This happens. The more people go to these gluten and dairy-free diets, it's more likely that they're getting more oxalate toxicity from the changes in their diet.
Okay. So why don't we know about this though?
Yeah. Why don't we know about this? I try to explain it in the book, because part of me is just sort of stuttering and speechless over why don't we know about this, because there's a lot of science there, but clearly we've never said, oh, that's so interesting that in rats, oxalate destroys their glands and gives them hypothyroidism and hypogonadism and all these problems. Why don't we study the effects on human exposure? There's not a lot of funding for it at any of these levels, where you see all the basic science in the cellular level. You see the rheumatological research showing oxalate crystals form in joints and cause all kinds of arthritis, bursitis, tendonitis, you name it. The historical literature really honed in on the gut damage, because this was very obvious in the 1800s. There was a seasonal diet back then. We didn't have refrigerators and all that. So people would eat oxalates more seasonally. And in England, where these brilliant doctors were, they would have this rhubarb season. Now, rhubarb is really high oxalate. And the wealthy folk, usually fellow doctors, who could afford sugar and afford little tarts and go to the bakery and get little tarts, or had their housekeepers make them fancy treats at Christmas or at holidays, rhubarb was the sheesh posh thing. It was a real fad for like 100 years in England. And those guys would get really sick when they go on this rhubarb binge, and they'd get intestinal blockage, and they get the kind of spasm that just shuts down the colon. Instead of getting the hyperactive spasm, they'd get a permaspasm, and it was like intestinal obstruction. So they defined this illness of oxalate. They called it the oxalic acid diathesis. They defined it as, number one, it was patients with digestive problems, and they either had rheumatological problems, which is pain and arthritis, or mood problems and other neurological issues. So that was the centerpiece of the initial simplistic way of saying, this is how you diagnose this problem. It's based on people with digestive problems.
Okay, so if the science goes back that far, I'm guessing that it's not more well known. There's not a whole lot of promotion about oxalate overload in the media, because that's counter to these fad diets.
Yes, indeed. It's very counter to our fad diets and our pet theories. The pet theories that have been proven to be wrong, we still hold on to them. So we have such a strong wall of bias, and we already know stuff that's so gotten in the way of any honest interpretation of the facts.
That's annoying. It's very annoying, especially as you say, you made yourself sick by eating healthy foods. That's
It's tragic.
yeah.
It's annoying. It's tragic. It's the classic human fallacy. Like human beings are fools. This is what Shakespeare said in all his plays. Like we're big jerks and fools. I mean, that's what Shakespeare is like. That's the human nature of us. And here we are doing it collectively over
Yes.
this kind of poisoning ourselves on healthy foods thing.
Yes, yes.
It's
Well,
very Shakespearean and tragic.
well, thank goodness you're here in the modern day to let us know about this. Now, what are some signs that you have oxalate overload? Is it more than just the joint or genital pain?
You know, in the beginning, there aren't always a lot of signs, and the signs can be very subtle. Like with my husband, I had no idea that oxalate caused carpal tunnel, but then I found a study from the 1930s that said, oh yeah, in fact, it was Harry Cohen. Is that his name? Harry Cohen. He ended up being the guy who put together the British National Health System. He was a really smart ass though when he was a young doctor, and he was seeing this in his patients, and he and his colleagues were treating people with carpal tunnel with the low oxalate diet back in the 30s and published a report.
Wow.
But he published it in a tiny little journal. He's busy being a superstar, right? So he didn't waste time trying to get a big journal. He just published it in his in-house journal at his hospital. And so it's been lost. Only 6 people have ever referenced that article in further research. So that's another example of why this gets lost. And so what I'm losing track of what we're talking about.
signs that someone has oxalate
The
overload.
signs include, well, let me tell you about my husband real quick. He started getting carpal tunnel and sleep problems and neck pain and other stuff. And he thought it was his pillow and ergonomics. And he kept having work help him fix his ergonomics at his desk. And he kept buying new pillows. And he ended up with blood in his urine. And we didn't connect that. We thought, oh, that's just a one-off thing. We won't worry about it. But those are the kind of things where you get a test with a little bit of blood that you don't normally see with the naked eye, but a urine test might be able to see it. Okay. If you ever get cloudy urine, that could be crystals coming out of your body. That could be oxalate crystals coming out of the body. I used to get that all the time. Okay. So cloudy urine, frequent urination, nighttime urination, having to run to the bathroom when you really don't have a lot of urine to release, or kind of bladder pain, jumpy bladder, that kind of thing, and any kind of urination, irritation. Frequent UTIs or the symptoms of UTIs when you do a culture and there's no infection, that's 90% chance or better that's an oxalate problem.
Okay. Wow.
So there's the urinary tract, there's the aches and pains, there's the stomach problems where you start to be more sensitive to things, and you can have either end. You can have reflux and heartburn. You can have irritable bowel syndrome. You can have diarrhea problems, constipation, or back and forth. So there's the GI stuff. If you start getting Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or low thyroid function, or gland problems, or menstrual problems, and over time, you can end up with this whole thing builds up into chronic inflammation and metabolic problems and autoimmune disease. So if you start feeling like you've got 3 or 4 autoimmune diseases because you're achy and you're whatever, it could be this.
Okay. And now I read something about oxalate. There's a connection between oxalate overload and kidney stones and some skin disorders.
Yes, right. So the kidney's job is to remove the oxalate from the blood. So we eat the oxalate in these foods, which are things like spinach and chard and sweet potatoes and quinoa and so on. And the oxalic acid component gets into the bloodstream, and eventually it's the kidney's job to remove it. Mm-hmm. Well, oxalic acid connects with calcium and becomes calcium oxalate stones, which is the principal type of kidney stone. So 80% of all kidney stones are primarily made of oxalate with the calcium that it chelates.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can't build a kidney stone if you don't have the basic ingredients. And the main ingredient is oxalate. And for some reason, there's magical beliefs in medicine that that restricting oxalate is not advantageous to avoiding kidney stones. Of course, if you starve off the basic ingredient, eventually you'll quit getting kidney stones. But there's a reason for that confusion too. You have to understand the physiology better.
Well, that's interesting because I had heard from a urologist that too much milk calcium can cause kidney stones.
Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Now, they were thinking that back in the 70s and 80s and so on, but they already had research that showed in the 1970s that the more calcium you take, the less kidney stones you have. Calcium protects you from absorbing oxalate a little bit.
Okay.
And calcium assists your body in releasing oxalate from the body. So the worst thing you could do is restrict dairy and calcium from the diet if you want to avoid problems with oxalate. And
Okay.
it's really pathetic that a modern day urologist would say that, because they're clearly not understanding the physiology of even urine.
Okay. Yeah, that's a little scary. Now, another thing that I read was that oxalate binds to certain nutrients. So if we're having these diets that are high in magnesium and potassium that are giving us the basic electrolytes and minerals that we need, yet the oxalate itself is pulling them out of the body, what are we doing?
Right. And it's even more complex than that, because we'll just simply measure for how much calcium or a mineral is in a food, and we assume that that's a bioavailable, that we can use it as a nutrient.
Right.
But if there's a lot of oxalate in that food, like for example, the calcium in spinach. Now, people modern day think they're getting calcium from spinach. The research says you're mostly getting negative calcium from spinach. You're getting less than zero, because the calcium that's in most plants is bound to oxalate, and you cannot use it as calcium. That's just a toxic ingredient. It's not true calcium. It's not a nutritive calcium ion. It's bound with oxalate. And with spinach, there's so much extra oxalic acid there that the general effect is A, you gain no calcium from the food, and B, the oxalic acid that gets into your blood starts stealing calcium and other minerals out of your blood or your cells or the tissues or your kidneys or wherever it finally grabs hold of a mineral. It can happen anywhere down the path as it runs around your body. And it's hitting some really critical places in your body, not just your poor stomach and small intestine and large intestine. Then you've got the vascular system that drains all those lovely nutrients from your intestines and takes it to the liver. So 100% of the oxalic acid you absorb from your food goes straight to the liver. And the liver cannot detox oxalate. There is no metabolism of oxalate. There's no detoxing of oxalate. There's no such thing. The liver makes additional oxalate, especially if there's inflammation going on and stress. So what happens in the liver is the liver uses a lot of glutathione to protect itself from all that oxalate after your spinach smoothie or your keto bread or your sweet potato fries. And then, so you're basically draining your detox capacity for other toxins, because the oxalate is using up so much liver self-protection. The body has to protect itself. And then that oxalic acid in the liver adds more. So what leaves the liver is a higher amount than it was when it came into the liver. And it goes straight past your diaphragm into your heart. That's how the blood circulation moves from the digestive tract to the liver to the heart, then into the lungs, then into the heart, and then it pumps out to general circulation. So there's a lot of critical organs in the way, long before the kidneys can take it out of the body.
Wow, that's deep. That is very complicated, very complicated.
And yet it's really simple, because that's just where how the body moves its nutrients through. So we don't even think about that circulation of things that come out of our digestive tract and what organs get smacked by it. What's down the road from your gut? So yeah, you wreck your gut. Now you're wearing out your liver. You're potentially harming the heart, lungs, vascular system, but also those immune cells and red blood cells that's floating in the blood, they take a hit. There's a recent study that was published, I think in 2019, that showed 40 minutes after a modest spinach smoothie, the circulating immune cells are damaged and crying for help, and they're putting out pro-inflammatory cytokines and calling for help, and they're distressed and they're not in a good position to protect you from infection or other problems in the body because they've just been poisoned by a spinach smoothie.
Okay. Now, is there any way, how do we know how much oxalate is in a particular food?
Well, at some level, you don't know it precisely because plants are living things and they vary a lot. Just like you and your twin sister are not going to be identical, even if you're identical, right? Even then, you can still tell the difference between twins because there's variability in lots of factors. So that happens with a plant. It might look the same on the outside, but it might be a little different. So you have to use the numbers that we do have based on testing as rough estimates, right?
Okay.
And so that's fine because the body's built to handle some oxalate. And it's really clear that some foods are just off the charts too high for what humans are built to handle, and other foods are fine. Okay. So if you're really aware of the top like 40 foods and they're really careful to not turn them into daily staples, that is enough. So a really simple list of high oxalate foods and foods we know are low in oxalate can take you 90% of the way to self-protection.
Okay. Okay. And your book, Toxic Superfoods, will list some of the foods that are high in oxalate.
It does.
And
it
some
does,
of the
and several times in several places. And you can get a beginner's guide list that explains this all in 4 pages from my website.
Okay.
And we're going to be having a data product available soon where you can get some nitty gritty into the numbers without it being overwhelming. It's going to be curated. So based on 18 studies of spinach, we're going to say it has this much per 100 milligrams as a ballpark way for you to estimate your own diet, because the spinach you just picked up at the store has not been tested.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And so you also mentioned you have suggestions for food swaps.
Yes.
Can you give us 3 of them, 3 or 5 of them?
Yes. So in the leafy green department, instead of spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens, any other green is fine. So arugula, watercress, lettuces are all super low. Cabbage is really low. Even kale isn't too bad. You just need to cook things like kale. But yeah, it's just 3 greens. Anything else is fine.
Okay.
In the beans and peas department, the beans aren't so good, but the peas are fine. So instead of white beans, use black-eyed peas. Instead of black beans, use something else. You got green peas, chickpeas, and black-eyed peas are better than using the standard beans generally.
Okay. Okay.
And then, don't go for the newfangled quinoa, buckwheat, pseudo grains instead of wheat. If you need to be off wheat, you might need to be off grains for a while and let your gut heal. So the best substitute for filling up on carbs is to eat more eggs, cheese, meat, fish, and real nutritive food that's easy to digest. It doesn't have plant anti-metabolites and like rough stuff that's beating up your gut. Like if you really want to have a healthy gut, more animal foods is usually better, and not loading up on beans, grains, nuts. Nuts are pretty bad. So the substitutes for nuts are coconuts, very low, and chestnuts aren't too bad in moderation. Pumpkin seeds are very low in oxalate. If you use sprouted pumpkin seeds in moderation, that's usually okay, unless you have a lot of gut distress, and then seeds are generally not so good. Flaxseed is low, and sunflower seeds aren't too bad. But chia, hemp, and sesame, no, don't be messing with the chia and the hemp.
Okay, note to self.
Note to self. Okay. One other substitute, if you love turmeric, don't use whole root turmeric, which is really high in oxalate. Use curcumin extracts instead, which almost have none.
Okay. All right. I like that one. That was really good because I love turmeric. So I will add the curcumin to my
I detect a better tummy in your future. It's going to be grand.
I do too. I'm excited. Thank you. Thank you.
Me too. Yay.
Now, it sounds pretty clear to me that the first line of defense against oxalate overload is to lower the intake of high oxalate foods. Yes?
Yes, because this is a toxicity problem. So you get at a root cause, because it basically, by lowering oxalate in the diet, you are lowering toxic stress in the body and you're improving your nutrient status in one fell swoop. It's like, should be real logical. If it's really about a toxicity, then just don't use the toxin.
Oh, now you're talking common sense. Come on.
That does not work today. Common sense is out the window because we're fancy now. We're modern. We're technical.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Now, other than minimizing the high oxalate foods, how is oxalate overload actually diagnosed? You mentioned
And
it a little bit earlier, but
it's tricky to do because there's not a lot of objective testing that works. And I talk a lot about this in the book. There's a whole chapter, basically no good tests. And really the best way to do it is I have this exposure guide on my website where you can take an inventory of how much oxalate foods you've been using, or just get a sense of all the ones you've been playing around with over your lifetime. You may have started with peanut butter as a kid, and then the potatoes and potato chips, and then the chocolate, that's enough to get you started. And then the whole wheat bread. And now modern time, you got to put this stuff in a blender and really do it good. So you can get a sense of that. And then you can look at the symptom list, and you can also get a sense of your risks. So if you've had any kind of inflamed or leaky gut or gut issues, then your ability to allow too much oxalate into your body is huge. So your absorption rate can be 5 times higher than normal if you have had gut problems. And if you've had any urinary tract problems or kidney problems, or if kidney problems are in your family, you may not be as good at getting rid of the oxalate as some people too. So there's those vulnerabilities. And then there's probably genetic things that make you get sicker quicker on this versus like some people are putting up with a lot of oxalate in their bodies and they think they're doing okay despite the little funny things that don't heal or the little aches and pains that come and go. They're like, I'm fine. Or their poor kid is like not really maturing properly and has got a little bit of developmental delay. They're fine. But this is really toxic for kids because they really need calcium and they need their nervous system not poisoned. And if you're feeding your kids these high oxalate foods thinking you're helping them not get COVID or something, that could be a tragic parental mistake that you could live to regret.
Okay. Well, hopefully they will listen to what you're saying and read your book and make better
Not likely.
nutritional choices. Hopefully. I'll do my best to get the word out.
Well, it's pretty exciting to have this lens because it's so powerful and you feel so much better. I feel 40 years younger than I felt when I was in my 30s and 40s. I just feel so better. Well, and that's really fun.
You know what? When you had mentioned that you were in your late 40s and you said that was 12 years ago when you stopped working, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm trying to calculate in my head.
Yeah, I'll be 59 in March.
Okay.
So I'm right there. I'm finishing my 5th decade here.
Yes,
or 6th decade, excuse me.
But you don't look like
ending. Thank God for oxalates to save me in the nick of time before I was a withered old thing.
You look great.
No, it's really true. I mean, this is like getting a youth pill.
Yeah.
It's cool. Who doesn't want that when they're about to be 60 and need to like perk things up a little?
Exactly. Now, can you speak a little bit about oxalate dumping?
Yeah. So a clever lady named Susan Owens coined that term because she was working with families with autistic kids. And they decided as a small cluster of 7 or 9 families to put their kids on this low oxalate diet, these autistic children. Okay. And they saw in these children, these sudden like crystals coming out and their behavior would collapse and they would get really sick. And this is the phenomenon of the body releasing stored, built up oxalate. So what we didn't really talk about is that when you're eating a big spinach salad or something and it's this too much oxalate for the body holds on to it to protect your vascular system and your heart and your kidneys. Because if too much oxalate's stealing calcium out of your bloodstream, the heart will stop or start frittling because you need calcium. And it's all this electromagnetics going on with the pacemaker and the muscles and the nerves that run that heart muscle. So the body can't leave a lot of oxalate in the bloodstream. So it holds onto it and it sticks in areas where you've had damage, inflammation, or infection.
Okay.
And when you stop eating it, the body's like, whoa, finally, I can get rid of this garbage that's been collecting. And it starts unloading the garbage. And if it's happening too fast, it can be quite toxic and cause lots of symptoms. I have people sending me pictures of all kinds of stuff happening to their bodies. They're shedding. I have people collecting jars of crystals of stuff coming off their skin, in their urine, in their stools, out of their eyes. They have literally, they're pushing crystals out of their skin. And so they were seeing some pretty dramatic things in these kids. And Susan called it dumping. That's sort of the extreme, like too vigorous clearing of tissue deposits back out into the bloodstream and back out into the urine. Can be in the colon. People will see gritty stools, gritty snot, more junk tartar on the teeth, because the saliva glands concentrate oxalate. When it's high in the bloodstream, you get more oxalate in the saliva, and that tends to cause more tartar to form on the teeth. So you can tell, this is another way you can tell if oxalate's an issue. Go on the diet and see if you feel better. And then if you start feeling worse again, and if you see cloudy urine again, or you get the gritty stools or the snot or the tartar or the eye grit, you can start to tell pretty quickly without anybody needing to test you.
Okay. That
now, not everybody
gross.
gets an immediate reaction. So I've had people come to me after 3 years going on a full meat diet where they weren't touching any plant foods for 3 years, and they didn't get sick with this dumping problem until the 3rd year on carnivore.
Okay.
Some people feel it right away. So it's very individual too. I can't really say that there's this exact way this is going to show up.
Okay. I mean, we are dynamic creatures, and like you said, individual difference does play a part in our own health.
Yeah, and we don't really know what tissues are most stressed and what minerals you're most needing. And if you're really depleted, I think it's harder for the body to do that clearing. And so if you've been on a keto diet for years with the almond bread and the spinach and the chocolate, these are all high oxalate foods, you may be so depleted in minerals that you don't even have the metabolic heft to do dumping for a while. And it took 3 years on carnivore to give you what you needed to even be capable of it.
Okay.
And I think some people's initial healing is happening in the kidneys. And so the rest of the body has to wait till the kidneys are good enough before it can empty out.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Now,
so one problem I should mention with this oxalate dumping and clearing is it's very stressful on the whole body, the immune system. It's not a good thing to let go. We want to adjust the oxalate intake so you don't have all that. You can add a little oxalate back in to tell the body to quit the dumping. And because if you don't, you might end up with a kidney stone from the oxalates that are hanging out in your bone marrow, or your thyroid gland might eventually become that future kidney stone too.
Okay. All right. That's good.
That's where the wrinkles get complicated, where you need to read a book, come to a group meeting, learn a little more.
Okay.
But you don't have to worry about that in the beginning. I think the main thing is just what foods are high in oxalate, and are you overdoing them? And that's probably a very risky thing to do.
Okay. All right. Well, here's a personal question for me. You said chocolate is high in oxalate. Is there a difference between dark chocolate and milk chocolate?
Yes.
Okay, tell me dark chocolate is healthier.
No, it's the opposite.
Oh gosh. Okay. Because of the calcium?
No, it's because the cocoa fraction, which is what dark chocolate is, all the sort of the cocoa powder plus, it's basically not watered down with milk and sugar as much. Okay. And so that's just more concentrated chocolate, because it's not the cocoa butter that has the oxalate. The fat is not where the oxalate is. It's in the brown stuff. So the darker the chocolate, the more oxalate in it. So you really need to back off on the darkness and get down to something a little nicer tasting anyway. And and really be careful about the portion size. And you can keep a little chocolate around for a while so you don't bomb out and go to zero oxalate too fast. You can keep things like that around your diet while you're getting rid of the nasty Swiss chard that I used to eat all the time. Like, you can live without Swiss chard. It takes longer for people to go, you know what, I don't like chocolate anymore either.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not
Don't start with chocolate.
Well, I wasn't about to thank you for that answer.
I know. At least coffee's not high in oxalate. If it was, I'd probably have been murdered by now.
A lot of people will be relieved to know that.
It's critical information because there's a lot of misunderstanding. People will tell you online that coffee's high in oxalate and it's not. And if you wonder about that, I have a whole blog post about this foolishness of that whole, it's coming from science. They'll put in a title of an article, coffee and tea are high in oxalate. And that's based on dehydrated instant coffee. So if you eat 100 grams of dehydrated instant coffee, that would have some oxalate in it. But nobody eats more than 2 grams of instant coffee because it weighs nothing. You use a little teaspoon of it to make it. It's so foolish. Like scientists are that dumb. To call that a high oxalate food. Only if you eat a whole jar of crystals in one fell swoop, you're not going to do that.
Yeah, nobody does that.
You'd probably die of caffeine poisoning or something if you did that.
Oh my goodness, Sally, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm going to have to replay it and take some notes because you shared a lot of things that I didn't even know, and I'm really excited to make the appropriate changes to my diet. So thank you for your time and for your expertise. Now, is there one nugget or one takeaway you want the audience to have about oxalate overload?
Be like Glen Alex and be open-minded. Be willing to learn when you already know everything. I mean, this woman meets all the cool cats. She meets all these people. She knows everything, and yet she's willing to know she doesn't know everything. And every wisdom starts there. So that's the key thing people should come away with. If they're mentally and emotionally not wanting to have this be true, then they need to work on that. That open heart needs to come back into their lives to protect themselves and to really give themselves every option they have in life to be as well as they can.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Now, I want everyone watching or listening to run out and buy Toxic Superfoods. So how can they buy it? And do you have what other supportive products do you have to go with this learning?
Well, the book just came out about a week ago, and the publisher, within a week of the book coming out, ordered a third printing because it was running low so quickly. So that's good news. People are buying the book. You can get it anywhere, supposedly. Hopefully the delivery is working well, but any bookseller should be able to get this book. And feel free to write to us on my website, which is Sally K. Norton. If for some reason you're having trouble finding the book, I will pass it on to the publisher because they need to know about that. So that would be a great service to me if you would complain in my website, whether you're having trouble finding that book. On my website, there's lots of free information, pages and pages of information and blog information. You can get the beginner's guide. You can sign up for my email list, and you can come to a group class and meet fellow travelers on the low oxalate road and learn some more with, presentation inside that group meeting. There's plenty out there, and you can get a cookbook. If you're wondering, how do I cook? Like, instead of potatoes, I'm saying maybe use turnips and rutabaga and things like that. Well, what do you do with that? You can find out in my cookbook, which is right there on my website.
Okay, fantastic. So SallyKNorton.com?
SallyKNorton.com.
Okay. Yep. All right, everyone, you've got that website. Go check it out, buy the book, reach out to Sally, and change your diet for your health.
Yeah, I'm telling you, if I had known this decades ago, I would have a completely different life. I would have a PhD and a big house and a whole different level of life, because this has hamstrung me and crippled me in so many ways over the years, completely unnecessarily. And people in my camp, we get it together. We were cheated by doing the best we could for our health.
Yeah, and from the secretiveness of this information, by
the uncoolness of it. Everyone's been trying to ignore it and make it die. And that's the problem, because they've been so actively ignoring it. That's putting all of us in harm's way, and we really shouldn't be happy about that.
No, we shouldn't. And I totally agree with you. So thank you again for your book, for your wisdom, and for sharing with us today.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to be with you. Thank you.
You're awesome. Okay, so I just want to thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Glen Alex Show. I really hope the information that Sally shared about oxalate overload is helpful to you, and that you will further your research and reach out to her. So please feel free to like, subscribe, and share.
Refresh your spirit with a nourishing thought.
Please allow me to leave you with this nourishing thought. The biggest takeaway I want you to have from this episode of the Glen Alex Show, which is about oxalate overload, is to forge your own path to health. None of us can have all of the information about health that is out there, yet each of us has intuition and a wise body. You see, your body already knows what you need nutritionally and what is not healthy for you. We simply choose to ignore the signs that our intuition and our bodies send us, letting us know when something is awry. For example, heartburn after eating is your body's way of saying that food is not good for you. Yet, what do most people do with heartburn? They'll take a medication to soothe the symptom rather than address the appropriateness of that food for them. This is also true with so-called healthy foods. So while you may not have all the information about health that is available out there, you do have intuition and your wise body. So I encourage you to pay less attention to fad diets and to what celebrities are doing, then give more credibility to your intuition and your wise body, and personalize your path to health. For more information on personalizing your path to health, please visit glenalex.com and check out my book, Living in Total Health, which is a great gift for yourself and for loved ones. Then tune in to the next episode of The Glen Alex Show. And until next time, be well.
The